This is going to look very familiar if those of you that have been around and you saw this 2 years ago when we updated it. It's just some updated charts, and we're still waiting with COVID. Some of the state reports and numbers for the end of the 2020 fiscal year have not been completed yet. So stay tuned for, we'll be sending out an update to all of the members in regards to working with Jeff. I'll be working with Jeff Simon. We'll get it up on the website and stuff, and possibly do a future Zoom in partnership with the Petroleum Council to roll out the final draft version once those numbers have been finalized. But it really is about how, this is about how the oil and gas tax does support and benefit the entire state. So the Petroleum Council and Western Dakota Energy did partner a little over 2 years ago to do the first version of this story going into the 19 biennium. And so over the interim, they asked me to do an update of that to keep the numbers going. And we've been building this, basically this report in such of a way that every interim we can update it and just keep this information fresh in front of legislators, but also in front of community leaders across the state, understanding the impacts that the oil industry has. Because as I've been working across the state now more in talking to people on the eastern side of the state, how important the oil industry is when they start seeing the impacts of their sales tax numbers in regards to when there's the downturn in the activity. It impacts them, not to the degree as Western Dakota Energy, obviously, members, but it has an impact. There's definitely a ripple across the state. So it's a very good idea to keep this in front of them. So we looked at this, and typo on the slide here, it's actually through fiscal year 2020 now. Going to keep this rolling forward and just highlighting where it's at, where it goes, how much has been there. I always like to go over, and for this audience, many of you are aware of this, but it's always good to just have that refresher that we have two oil taxes. We have the extraction tax, which went into place in 81. That was a constitutional measure that was passed by the voters, and it had the tax rate set at 6.5%. From the time that was introduced until the 2015 legislative session, there were a number of incentives and triggers put into place. And in the 2015 session, they actually removed all of the triggers and a lot of the exemptions to the extraction tax and lowered the rate to 5%. And it's a political hot potato for legislators. You have some that say we didn't need to reduce the tax, we could have just gotten rid of all the triggers. And others say if we got rid of all the triggers and the exemptions and kept the tax rate, we would never even broke the 1 million barrels a day in production. So, no one's got a magic time machine to go back and live in an alternative universe to say what would have happened if that would have been, but it's always going to be a political hot potato. But we're looking at the reality of a 5% extraction. Now, this isn't necessarily tied to the tax study, but just as a tip for everyone, or a little tidbit of information, is with the current environment that we have with price, the trigger would, if they would not have removed the triggers, if they would have not have done anything, the trigger actually would be back on right now when we would be collecting 0% of extraction tax. So removing those triggers while then reducing the rate, it actually has increased the tax bill to the oil industry by over $1 billion if we would have just left the triggers in and kept the rate at 6.5. The extraction tax, for the most part, does go to constitutional funds, the legacy fund being the largest one at 30% of all extraction tax goes to the legacy fund. 20% goes to the resources trust fund. It's actually, for the next couple of bienniums, it's 20.5%. And that extra 0.5% of the extraction tax going to the resources trust fund is due to a difference of understanding of how to make the deposits from the taxes to the Resources Trust Fund by the treasurer. She was putting 20%, but not including the extraction tax collected on Fort Berthold. And so there was a shortage that was found through an audit. I think it was honest mistake on everyone's part. No one really understood. They just kept business as usual. But now to make that difference, there's an extra 0.5% going to the Resources Trust Fund. 10% going to the Common School Trust Fund and 10% to the Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund. Those are both educational funds. Again, tidbit, either the Foundation Aid did not move, they did not make up any dollars to the Foundation Aid like they did Resources Trust Fund, even though I had the same accounting thing. And that's because it basically was too difficult to figure out how much that should be, because they can spend the Foundation Aid money. And so they just said, we'll leave Foundation Aid alone. The Common Schools Trust Fund, there is a $64 million of legacy fund earnings will get put into the Common School Trust Fund to make up that difference. A couple of other funds that the extraction tax does benefit is the conservation grants. That's energy conservation, your renewable energy development fund, the oil and gas research fund, general fund, tax relief fund, budget stabilization, lignite research, and the strategic investment improvement fund. If you think back to our earlier sessions, when you look at the budget, basically anything in the buckets is there. I always like to point out that the oil and gas industry funds the research for all of our energy sectors. They put dollars into lignite and into renewable energy along with the oil and gas research. This just shows where those dollars go in regards to how it flows for the extraction tax. And then we have the gross production tax. Again, this is the original tax. It's an in lieu of property tax, something Western Dakota Energy fights for very vehemently to make sure people understand that it's in lieu of property tax. This is not bonus dollars. This is in lieu of property tax. When oil was discovered, the state put in the gross production tax and does not allow the locals to tax the oil production. So that was originally at 4.25, moved to 5%, and it's been at 5% ever since then. Again, it benefits a number of state funds. These are within the gross production tax stream. They improve, that funds all of the buckets, but the Abandoned Well and Reclamation Fund, which has gotten a lot of attention right now because of the state also putting CARES dollars in there to do some of the reclamation of the abandoned wells. And is this fund balanced properly? And those types of things is the conversation. The Outdoor Heritage Fund, and then again, the buckets funds. It is in lieu of property tax, and so we also have the hub cities and hub city schools, county city schools, townships, and the impact grants. All of those are very minimal at this point. Where the dollars go, again, this is, many of you are very familiar with this, 30% to the legacy fund, and then it splits with 1/5 going to those state side and the 4/5 to the local side, and 30% of the 4/5 going to the locals. So I would say it's a very complicated formula, but it we get the dollars. So these are the updated to show year to date where we're at. And again, we don't have the 2020 fiscal years, but this goes through the end of fiscal year 2019, that we're over $20 billion now in oil gas tax dollars collected cumulatively since the Bakken started. The gross production tax is a higher amount of that. That's again due to some of those triggers and exemptions. I think it's a fortunate thing, and politically it would also create an issue. And Western Dakota Energy, I know Jeff would be, and all of you as members would be pretty hot to trot if when they decide to put a incentive or a trigger on, that it would be on the gross production tax side and not the extraction tax side. So that's why the gross production tax is a little bit bigger piece of that chart. This is, Ryan talked about this this morning. If you were on the sessions this morning, Ryan Rauschenberger talked about, the sales tax side of it and how much comes from the oil industry, and how in the early set, on his chart, I believe it was a 2013, it was a really thin sliver on top. And here, this is actually looking at all of the state taxes again, the major ones, and you can see now, not just sales tax is the red, the bottom piece of this. And I apologize that the colors aren't more distinguished, but there's a light blue. That's the oil taxes, the gross production tax and the extraction tax. Look how much more that is. It equates to over 50 on this in 2020 and 2019, it's over 50% of the dollars. And so then when we take into consideration the amount of sales tax that the industry pays, the amount that of individual income tax and corporate tax that is related to the industry, it's a significant amount of the revenues. And this is, honestly, it's a good picture as to why the state's budget is so dependent on the oil and gas industry at this time. When you see how much revenues, even if we're only accounting for, by the state's definition, $400 million of oil tax revenue going to the general fund, but when you consider transfers, it's about $1.4 billion of general fund revenue on a $4.4 billion budget is coming directly from oil and gas tax. And when you tie the industry into the sales tax numbers, the income tax numbers, motor vehicle tax, and those types of things, it obviously has a significant part in the budget picture. So this just gives a little bit updated breakdown where the oil and gas tax distributions go. I will point out on this pie chart, it does go to a lot of different areas. Schools has gotten about 8% of the revenue between the common school and foundation aid. The tribes, 3 affiliated, 7% of the oil and gas tax is actually going back to the 3 affiliated tribes. The tax relief is there in regards to that was the property tax buy down. It's not taking into consideration some of the other tax relief that the state has done in regards to buying down, basically taking over the school mills. This is actually the direct property tax relief, the 12 mill buy down that they did. We will be updating this when those new numbers are out to include now that difference because of the county social services mill levy being taken over and that being paid by the state. That's in a sense, that's property tax relief, and it will be a small sliver right now on the totals because there's only been one biennium of that, or 2 technically, with including this current biennium of those dollars being paid by oil tax. I think that's a great reminder to everyone outside of some of the other things that I'll show here of the impacts. We'll be updating, want to update that information that oil tax dollars specifically are paying for the county social services or by the state now. I don't think that can be emphasized more than enough or enough, because when the state took that over and eliminated 12 mills for the counties, that's the property tax relief, and that is the oil taxes paying for everyone's county social services. The other note on this one is the legacy fund. You'll see it's at 27%. That number will slowly creep up as this report gets updated every biennium, but it's below the 30 because the legacy fund was not in place the first couple of years of the Bakken. So there's a couple of years where there's no tax collections going into the legacy fund. So that's just a note, because a lot of people, if you see that, you think 30% of the taxes that should equal, and it's because we had some years where there was not dollars going into the legacy fund included in this report. I always like to remind, I think this is a good reminder, the surge bill, where the dollars went. Remember that 450 of that went to DOT. And while those DOT dollars may have been used out west, it meant it freed up their other dollars in their budget to support projects throughout the state. And we had the non-oil counties and townships receiving dollars through the surge bill as well. The next couple of slides here are just, I thought, just in the interest of time, we would just do the visuals of the heat maps of where these dollars are going. The Outdoor Heritage Fund. This is one of the smaller funds, but just to show the impact and that these dollars from the Outdoor Heritage Fund are being spread throughout the state, with a good portion of those going to eastern counties. Honestly, when you look at the darker colors, Stutzman, Barnes, Ransom, Cass County receiving a good portion of those dollars. This was that property tax relief buy down, just a table of where that was going. $440 million in property tax buy downs at that time. Where that property tax relief was at, obviously, the more property that a county has, taxable valuation, and so your more populated counties and more, if you want to call them urban counties, are going to get the lion's share of that, with Cass County being obviously the leader, with Fargo, West Fargo, Grand Forks, Burley County with Bismarck, Ward County with Minot, but even Williams, Williston area, Stark County, Dickinson, significant property tax buy down dollars went across the state. Education funding, we had a great session this morning with Senator Shively and Steve Holland reviewing the education and the funding. When you look at the funding formula, the amount of dollars, on the formula is set to be right around $10,000 per student that the state pays. This is actually, this map here actually is the actual dollars that have gone to these counties, because you have some school districts that are off formula, and so they may receive less than the 10,000, or they may be receiving more than the 10,000. But and again, some of this is also going to be driven by enrollment numbers. Again, for Cass County, Grand Forks, Ward, Burley, that also has an impact in it. But it goes to show that the dollars that are collected in oil and gas tax are benefiting everyone across the state.
Common Schools Trust Fund.
Yeah, this is a good portion. This is the Common Schools Trust Fund. So the Common Schools Trust Fund is a little over $5 billion now. The earnings off of the Common School Trust Fund are transferred to the general fund. Actually, it's not. It's kind of a pass-through with the general fund to fund K-12 education. It is a separate source of revenues, but the Common Schools Trust Fund, of that $10,000, the Common Schools Trust Fund, I believe now, and I don't have all of my paperwork in front of me, but I believe it makes up about $2,300 of that $10,000. So about a fourth of the K-12 funding. Oh, Jody Smith just said $1,500. Okay. She would know. She would know. She manages it. So, thanks, Jody. But it's a significant portion of that K-12 funding, and why the state has been able to do the level of education funding that they're doing now. Water projects. This is a big one. Because the Resources Trust Fund, as we know, it's 20% of that extraction tax of water. Really, it's a lion's share of the oil and gas, the tax money, and where that's spread. Obviously, when you start taking into projects like the Fargo diversion, we've got Minot flood protection, Mouse River flood protection, Grand Forks, these dollars are spent everywhere. And I won't go into it right now, but Resources Trust Fund funding water projects has been a really good thing for the state for the last couple of bienniums, but with this downturn, it put a hold on a lot of water projects. And so that is an issue that will have to be dealt with. So in summary, we are benefiting statewide. A lot of the oil and gas tax dollars, it's really infrastructure. It's helping to fund those water projects. It's going into things like from the SIF, when it went to DOT, you've got, various projects throughout the state that's funding that infrastructure. And you can actually say, I know working with Western Dakota Energy members, a good portion of those gross production tax dollars are going into the infrastructure in these communities. It's been building and rebuilding county roads and bridges, cities expanding their water treatment plants, their wastewater, extending sewer and water mains, those types of things. So it's an infrastructure. It really is a lot of infrastructure. The education funding is significant. Budget stabilization fund. We fill the budget stabilization fund with a lot of oil tax dollars. That's why, as Senator Wardner talked about the budget picture, having that filled the way that it has, and that's with oil tax dollars, which winds up then even subsidizing the general fund more. And research. Research is a big thing as we look at the next couple of years. When we look at our oil and gas industry, we look at the coal industry, trying to find ways to improve and enhance those industries in our state. Research is going to be a critical component to that. So we do see those statewide benefits. This is actually this is actually the exact same slide that I used last year in regards to the conclusion. We need to continue support of the responsible development of the oil and gas in North Dakota and the investments in infrastructure, both in the producing region, so that this industry can continue to thrive, but also infrastructure across the state to allow us to diversify our state's economy as well. With that, my contact information, if you know how to get a hold of me,